record button. I've hit the record button now. So welcome everyone. It's Thursday. Well, in New Zealand, it's Thursday morning, the 16th of July, and continuing my connections with people around the world. And I'm really thrilled to have Jay Brown from America with me, who's the Yoga Podcaster Supremo. You probably are, you know. There's probably there's not many people doing this, the depth that you do in terms of podcast and reaching out.
Well, I appreciate you saying that. That's a nice thing to say. I take it very seriously, and it's something that I feel real passionate about doing. So I'm glad that you think that there's depth there, because that's what I absolutely strive for.
Yeah. So we met, was it 2017? Do you remember, in Auckland?
Yes, I think that's right. I had only gone there once, and I believe it was in 2017. That's right.
And you were at the Aurora conference, and I was at your weekend workshop.
I see. Oh yeah, you came to my workshop, not just the conference, though, right?
So what happened is, like, I came up to you and I gave you a big hug, and you said, "Have we met?" And I said, "We have now."
Oh, I like that. I'm sure I liked it in the moment, and I like hearing about it again. It's beautiful.
And then you said, "What do you do?" And I spoke about what I did, and you said we kind of do the same kind of work in terms of a gentle approach. And so welcome, Jay. Thanks for coming. Really appreciate it. Hey.
My pleasure. I'm glad to get a chance to talk to you again from on the other side of the planet.
Yeah, it's amazing. How often do you get to be interviewed? Or,
you know, it's interesting you say that. I do them every once in a while. People reach out. If anybody wants me to come on their shows, I'm always happy to, because I know what it's like to reach out and try to get people to come on your show. So I go on now and again, but I have to record shows regularly. So I'm doing it, pretty often. And I don't really think of it that differently. Like, having this conversation with you is not any different than if you and I are in a certain way, although you're getting to steer this one. It's not any different than it would be if I was just going to talk to you for my show. Like, I think of it the same way. It's like, this is time set aside, and I'm just going to put my attention and see if I can connect with this person.
Yeah. And your conversations are they are good, and I appreciate you wearing your heart on your sleeve. And we just spoke about that kind of sense of transparency, or how transparent you want to be, or certainly being open and as truthful as you need to be or can be.
Well, in the context of the show, because when we were talking about it before we started recording, I was thinking of it a little bit different. In the context of the show, I really started out doing the podcast with that element of the intros and outros in mind. I had a inspiration in Mark Maron, and if anybody knows his podcast, he's one of the biggest podcasters, and he did that in the early days. He was always like working through stuff in a very like raw way, and I really appreciated that kind of like radical transparency. And so when I first started doing the show, that was like, I was going through all kinds of stuff. My life was kind of falling apart in Brooklyn. My center was going to have to close down, and I was kind of freaking out. And so I started doing the show partly just for me to do stuff. And I remember early on, my wife would listen. She doesn't ever listen anymore, but she used to listen in the early days. And I remember her going, "What are you doing? Why are you telling everyone all this stuff?" And I just thought, there was so much hype around yoga teachers.
Yes.
And there's always like all this putting your best face forward for marketing in a way, like living the yoga life or whatever, that you never got to see sort of the shadows or the underbellies of like teachers in massive pain and having to get hip replacements or whatever, all this other stuff. And I just thought I wanted to like tear those masks off and be like, look, I've been at this for a little bit longer than a lot of other folks who are doing it under me. I'm looking at the people of the generation before me and what's happening with them. Some of the things that we were taught don't pan out over time, and not everybody's admitting to that, although that became more of a conversation over time. In any case, when I started the show, I just thought, I'm just going to tell people. The meditation was, I'm going to hit the record button and I'm just going to talk into the mic like it's my best friend, and I'm going to tell them what's really going on. So I've been doing it ever since. I have to say, since the show has grown though, and it does have like a bigger audience, I've definitely become more polished than that. Like
Well polished.
I
Yeah,
still make a point. I still make a point of like revealing, because I think that's part of it. But at the same time, I'm much more aware of the repercussions of what I say, because I've gotten in trouble and like made mistakes
I
over the
noticed.
years, you know?
And that's a massive subject too, about how um, when you say something that challenges someone's idea of their place in the world, we're not very tolerant now. And I'm seeing people that are being really good friends of mine that are kind of a bit more conservative, and I'm seeing conservative people that are becoming a bit more liberal. And the where you stand um, in the world, and and I do really appreciate the way that you do communicate and talk. It's like I spent the summer listening to a lot of your podcasts. So I do building work. I've got some land here, and instead of listening to music, I was listening to Jay Brown, and I went through pretty much most of them. And these were the early day ones too. So I can see how more polished you are now too, which is really cool. I'll tell you what, one of the things is, it just felt like, these were real people. And I remember when I was 18, when I did one of my first Vipassana meditation retreats, and there was a Buddhist monk there from, there were quite often some Buddhist monks. And I spoke to one of these monks and I went, man, this guy's just normal. He's just like an ordinary human. And I thought there was something special. So I appreciate that a lot, that realness.
I try. I think part of that, the inspiration of that other show where he clearly didn't like give them questions in advance. And
Yes.
there's a thing that happens where, if you're having a conversation with someone, it isn't always so clean. Like people talk over each other sometimes, or, like there's not always like I say something and then you say something and then I say something and then you say something. And I wanted to try to recreate that. So if you listen to those early episodes, you can hear I'm horribly interrupting people. Part of it's because I'm nervous and insecure, but
Yes.
part of it's because I wanted to feel conversational.
Yes.
I've learned since how to just be like a better listener, and how to still have that quality of back and forth and not be
Yeah.
question and answer.
Yeah.
And some people are more comfortable with it, and some people want there to be more structure to the situation. But when it's open like that, that's where I find the most interesting things that have happened. And in order to do that, I have to relate to them as an equal.
Yeah.
Like I can't, there's a few times where I was a little starstruck by whoever I was talking to, and it's harder,
Charles
but
Eisenstein.
oh yeah, like
Yeah.
that the idea is just to try to, even that's a good example, because I was a little bit like, oh my God, how am I gonna talk to this guy? But like to try to talk to him like I would talk to anybody else, even though he may be higher profile,
Yes.
is what I'm working for.
Yeah. Yeah. And it was great. I've listened to most of it. I have also noticed that they're getting quite long, like an hour and 45 minutes. So
I try to keep them to it
yeah.
to an hour and 30. I try not to let them go, but sometimes if the conversations go longer, then, it depends how much I clip the intro, so, I'm working on trying not to let them be too long, but I also find that it takes about 20 or 30 minutes sometimes before I feel like we relax into the conversation.
Thanks. Yeah.
So I'm letting them be a little longer. I hope they're not too long.
Yeah. No, I'm just noting that as well. I'm a bit thirsty too. So so Jay, introduce yourself to the audience. How do you like to be known in the world? I love
Oh
asking that
gosh.
question.
How do I like to be known in the world? That's different than like tell me your bio. I don't know. How do I like to be known in the world? Um, I guess I started out as a yoga teacher. I I ended up doing writing, coming out of like talking I was doing and then writing, and then I got into podcasting. I think I came into yoga at a pretty pivotal time in the early 90s in New York City, where it was just starting to branch into the mainstream. Like when I got there, it still had like its hippie roots. showing, and it was very underground. People didn't know what yoga was at that time. I got into yoga because I wanted inner peace, because
Mm-hmm.
my mom had passed away and I was real messed up inside.
Yeah.
And advanced yoga meant having peace inside yourself, and I wanted that. Ultimately, it did, soon after I got into it, start to really hit the mainstream and kind of like skyrocket up in terms of even industry happening.
Mm-hmm.
And I rode that wave. I was never like a full like A-list yoga celebrity. I was always like C or B, but I managed to do my own thing. I taught for 10 years as an independent teacher. I then owned a yoga center in Williamsburg, Brooklyn for 10 years, where I basically had a little bubble, and I developed what I teach now, and I trained other teachers, and I had like my own little thing that lasted for a good while before it didn't before it didn't. And then since then, after the yoga center closed down in 2017, which is right around when we met actually,
Okay. Yeah.
um,
You,
I moved my family an hour and 45 minutes away to Pennsylvania.
uh-huh.
And since then, I moved a bunch of stuff online, which was very favorable for me considering everything that's happened of late. I was already had everything in place. And that's really when the podcast took hold even more. And I guess, and I don't know if I'm still where your question was about how do I want to be represented in the world? How do I want to be represented in the world? I want to be represented as like a good person who
Yeah. No,
cares about the
yeah.
life. But I would say, to conclude, right now, I'm really just focused on a lot of ways, like how yoga teachers can do what they do in an independent way, because I think one of the only reasons I'm still like surviving, if you will, as yoga being my profession, is because I never gave away my store. Like I own everything, rights to everything. I control all the means of distribution. It's like I had that guy Derek Sivers on. I don't know if you heard that one, but
No.
it's very much about being an independent creator,
Uh-huh.
and how does an independent creator actually make something that might sustain for them.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
And yeah, no, that's awesome. There's a lot happening in the world at the moment, which is one of the other reasons for me also contacting you and reaching out. Um, just jumping around a little bit, going to the pandemic. And I was listening to some of your previous podcasts as well, and I'm going, well, this was 6 weeks ago. I can't really use this as a baseline for communicating to you about what's happening, because things changing like so quick. It's unreal. So
it is.
what? Just a little bit of background here. New Zealand's in a really good shape. A few days ago, no new cases. We're going around like it's pretty normal. We're all still concerned about it. People are concerned about, on the different benches, everybody has a certain degree of concern and care. And America's just in a wee bit of, well, not a wee bit.
You're being kind. You're being kind a wee bit.
As soon as I said that, I went, "Come on, Paul.
It's
You're in
not
the
that wee. There's nothing wee bit about it. It's a whole lot of whatever it is. It's a whole lot of it.
Yeah, it is. So what's the
I'm profoundly envious of your leader. I think she's amazing.
yes,
And the contrast is stark
yeah,
comparatively. I would say, where I live here in Pennsylvania, it is only an hour and 45 minutes from New York City, which was a big main hotspot.
yeah,
Here, Governor Wolf, to his credit, did down early on when other states had not yet.
yeah,
And we did do a pretty good job, like in the county that I live in, Northampton County, of not having it get out of control. And we were very much on the down slope along with New York. Now, of course, there's other places of the country where is different. There's different things happening. But where I am, we are in a reopening phase, and we're in a green reopening phase, which is we're almost open, except there's some things limited, like bars and like some in-person dining, but still mask wearing and 6 feet distance apart is being implemented. But there is still a lot of fear because there's so much news reporting in the country, because we didn't have any kind of good leadership from the top or planned. There's so much contradictory information, and there's just so much unknown about the virus, even on a science level, that it and our politics are so polarized and ridiculous
Yes.
that it's just, I don't know if I'm allowed to cuss on your show, but it's a freaking shit show. I don't know how to say it any
Yeah,
other
you said
way.
however you like. Yeah,
It's a shit show.
yeah,
And for me personally, again, my family completely was in lockdown for a couple of months where we didn't have any contact with anybody. And then we made sure to have that in place before we visited my in-laws who are older. We wanted to be very, very safe. And then since we've been back, things have been slowly reopening, but it's this new phase. And I was talking about on the show recently of like, it's a negotiation of like how much we're opening our pods. So we had these closed pods of just our immediate family, but now, okay, we really trust that this other family did the same thing that we did, and our daughters are best friends, and they're like miserable. We have to let our daughter play with her friend.
yeah,
So we decided to open our pod up there.
yeah.
And we recently had like a birthday party. It was outside, and we saw people for the first time. That was like 3 days ago. And it was kind of wonderful because there was all of these other dads from the like kids that my kids play with, who I've seen at like plenty of events. But like I'm the yoga guy and they're like in other professions, and most of the time the conversation among the dads, it's pretty superficial. They're not getting into deep stuff. But this time we had the most
Wow.
real conversations about real stuff. I was like, I would hang out with these guys. These are really cool guys once they start talking about real things.
Yeah.
So it's a real weird silver lining. But in terms of yoga, I have a studio here. Maybe you can see behind
Yeah,
me.
yeah.
And,
This is
I
your
have
home.
well, this is, I have a home that's about 20 minutes away.
Okay.
This is a studio that I've been working out of for a couple years that I got in a pretty, not great neighborhood, but a very cheap rent. And so I've been doing my online classes here for years, but I do have a few students who come in person as well.
Okay.
And just yesterday, for the first time since everything, I had one of those students come to class,
Yes.
and we did like have distance and the windows. We did all these precautions, but ultimately it was the first time like I had an in-person class in like months and months and months and months. And I have to say, it felt like good.
Yeah.
I was very happy for it.
Great.
So it's still a little bit scary. If you've been listening to the show, I have my own questions just in general, because I don't really trust a lot of some of these institutions of knowledge. It's not that I don't trust science. I do trust science, but I don't always trust the institutions that are funneling the information to us. And, I think that, for instance, you'll hear cases reported, but sometimes you don't have a lot of information about what those cases are. So it's very confusing. I think right now, more than anything, we're just trying to be cautious. You don't want to be irresponsible, but at the same time, I've been wondering, it's like, how long does everything stay closed down?
Incredible. It's really difficult to know. Because we don't know how really it spreads, whether masks are good. Some people say wearing masks is not good for your respiratory system. There's so many. I think the thing around science for me, and I've questioned these kind of things for a lot, I think we have very similar kind of viewpoints, is that it's corporate and government funded science I'm not really in favor of. And we know there's a lot of that. And I want to look at science for real science, and it's hard to find now. And when you look at the 1% that we're going, we can't deal with the 1%. They're still pulling the shots. They've still got us going like this, and that's what I find difficult. You know what? I've decided just to pull away from it. My head can't really handle all the different variants that are around as well, because I don't know what's true and what's not true. I don't even know how true my own thoughts are. You know, or how I make them up. And you know, we've got how many billion people in the world, and we all see the world differently. And all the Christians see Christianity different, and every yoga person sees yoga different. So it's like, how can we kind of find some common ground in terms of our relationship and our relationship with this whole, it's the world's edgy, isn't it? Edgy.
I think so. I mean, there's a
Fear.
strange irony to it. I mean, for many years, I personally, more than anything, have needed the ability to feel measured, to be measured, the ability to respond to something rather than to react to it.
Yes.
And like the show and everything that I'm doing
Yeah.
in my breathing and moving practices and in my writing and the podcast is very much about cultivating. You could just say sthira sukha if you wanted to get
Yeah.
more yoga theoretical about it.
Yeah.
That ultimately that's what I associate that with, is this a facility in myself to be measured,
Yeah.
to hold a strong viewpoint, but be willing to be shown to be wrong, or to be passionate about something and yet not dogmatic about it.
Yeah.
And I think we do need that more than ever, because there's not a lot of models for it in the world. And it's the only way where, like, although, there's a few places I see it where, like, I don't know if you follow the Brett Weinstein and his dark horse candidate plan, or there's like a few people out there they
Yeah.
sometimes call it the dark web, right? Or whatever it's called,
Yeah.
the intellectual
Yeah.
dark web.
Yeah.
And I know it's a controversial thing, but to me, some of those people, those thinkers, do put forth what I think of as more measured ideas,
Yeah.
and are willing to have real debate. But
Yeah.
like what you say, sometimes it's very clear that what I'm getting is through a very obvious filter to me.
Yeah.
And so I don't know, we have to be discerning, which I think is also what yoga practice is very good for.
Yeah. How can we relate to this in a way that doesn't make us ill and going down these rabbit holes? And
Well, I think that the way that I don't go down, I mean, I do go down rabbit holes. I actually don't mind letting my mind go there, because I think I also feel like I have a ground to stand on to do that. And that is entirely why I have deep faith in my yoga practice. I just wrote this month, about my faith in yoga, which is a kind of taboo thing to say almost, because I don't think of it as a religion. I grew up in a like sort of modern Jewish household. I was like a bar mitzvah, but I sort of renounced religion. I don't believe in organized religion.
you need
And
that.
I got into yoga as a spiritual path that was sort of secular in a way, but
Yeah.
still had a deep feeling of devotion and even mysticism and magic. So I don't rule those things out, but I think that what I have faith in and what's really allowing me to not lose it right now is that on some level, from like a non-dual tantra standpoint, there's nothing wrong with me. There's nowhere I need to get to.
Mm.
I'm okay, especially right now. If I just tap into this moment right now, sitting here talking to you, my heart's beating and my breath's happening, and the sun and the moon and the stars are circumambulating. It's all happening.
Yeah.
So on that level, I feel okay. I can go inside myself and feel okay,
Yeah.
regardless of the sky falling, or whatever. So that is, I think, the baseline that I cherish yoga for.
Yes.
And it's been invaluable right now, when so much of these things that were so the status quo are now seemingly collapsing.
Yeah. Around us. And yeah, I had a quite a cool experience, because it was a while ago. Well, it was probably about 2 months ago, and lots of agitation was coming up, and I was getting a bit angry and a bit frustrated, not knowing where to go. And I sat down under a tree, And I suddenly said, Paul, what are you doing? You're kind of coming up against this thing fighting. Why don't you have a relationship with the stuff going on in your mind in the same care and attention that you do to your yoga? And I went, okay. And I gave it a bit of kindness, and I softened around the edges. And that whole emotion that I was building up in me really quickly dispersed. And it was a great moment to relive that kind of those possibilities, that we're not just stuck in a particular place, that we can have that ability to move as well. And I'm
Even
sure
that
that,
you even that you have like some tools that you feel like you can utilize, or that you are in a position to feel empowered to make a shift in yourself like that.
yeah,
That's invaluable.
yeah. And that was probably one of the main reasons why I started doing these interviews, was how can I call on people that I have respect for, that have something that they can offer, so that other people can go away with these little tools that they can also use when things are tough. Because it doesn't feel like it's going to suddenly get easy. That's the truth,
No.
in terms of the outside world, but maybe our inside world can keep becoming easier, and we can. So
Yeah.
what would your main thing be in your practice today, communicating to people? What's your
Yeah.
focus?
I mean, I think my focus these days more than anything has to do with like mindset, or it's mind stuff. I've simplified the physicalities so much and tried to, you took my workshop, so you know a lot about it, but for your listeners, to de-emphasize like the trying to do as much as you possibly can, or you're lazy kind of mindset,
Yeah,
and using breath as a technical key, like put your attention to your breath instead of like pushing hard on your body,
yes,
and ultimately developing, you know it sounds almost cliche from yoga teacher standpoint, but sustained attention,
mm-hmm,
developing sustained attention, the ability to put your mind on something and keep it there for as long as you want and then release it,
mm-hmm,
like that muscle, that attention muscle,
mm-hmm,
developing that equals having more facility in yourself, like you were just describing with yourself in that moment, where you get to have a little bit of say about what your mind does
yes,
some of the time.
yeah,
Not all of the time, but some of the time. And even just that little bit of some of time is huge, because you're not just forever being blown with the wind,
yeah,
but sometimes you can steer the ship,
yeah, yeah.
and
Yeah, go on. Sorry.
no, I was just going to say that. So for me, yoga practice is a lot about developing that, what I think of as like the fundamental skill set of hatha practice, of
Yes,
sustained attention leading to clearer perception.
yes,
And then ultimately, and this is what I've been talking about recently on this show, which is interesting in the context of the pandemic and how much we're relying upon science, is the ability to have like an inner sense of knowing,
yeah,
like a place you operate from, which is an intuitive thing that comes from inside of you. And ultimately, and lastly, I would say the overarching thing goes back to what I was just saying about that feeling of okayness in myself,
yeah,
that facility and clarity of perception also allows for experience of yourself where you don't feel all of the external definitions and identifiers on you,
mm,
and you feel yourself in that whole way, like we were describing as breath and heart and sun and moon. And there's a wondrous, awestruck
yeah,
experience of that,
yeah,
that is a place of healing and perspective.
yeah,
So ultimately, I'm interested in the healing and perspective that comes from developing those kinds of skill sets.
yeah, yeah. Not trying to be necessarily healed, but allowing the process and the work that you do to support that movement towards healing.
Yeah.
So in my practice, I've been exploring and teaching, been exploring choices. So one of the things that is really important for me is kindness, in the same way that I was just communicating to you. But I do very simple movements engaging the skeletal system. And we do one movement, and then I suggest people do it with some other sense of moving, rather than maybe just moving with the muscles. So moving from the joint space, or moving from the fluid in your body. And you have 3 different experiences, and then you start to realize that when you do a movement, it's not, you're choosing to do that movement in that particular way. So if then you have even more choices, then your relationship with you, and then I believe ultimately with the outside world, has also more choices as well.
Well, you sound a lot like my friend Amy Matthews from like
Yeah,
the somatic world.
yeah,
I love her
me
so
too.
much, and
Yeah,
she talks about health. She like had this definition that I cherish, where she said it's about having the full range of movement possibility available to you.
yes,
And I so appreciate. I will say that for myself, I started out in like the New York scene where there was a real established expectation about what a yoga class was like.
yeah,
So for a long time, I was really catering to that expectation. But since I've left, I certainly have opened it up more and more for what you're talking about. And it's also just in terms of the evolution of yoga, this idea of invitational language
yeah,
and not imposing alignment on people.
yeah,
All of that goes to what you were describing about people seeing it as a choice that they're making
yeah,
rather than like some rule that they're trying to follow.
yeah. Yeah, or being told what to do. So that inquiry. Now, Amy's definitely one of my inspirations as well. So also
Mm,
Bonnie Bainbridge Cohen. I'm doing some online training with her, and I had
mm.
plans to meet Bonnie again. I saw her last year. I was going to see her again this year. I was plans to do things with Amy. But Amy's been really kind. She came on one of my talks, and she shared one of my yoga classes with me as well. So I've been bringing
Uh,
teachers in to share classes. Just
well, I had been in my bubble, I told you, at my yoga center for whatever, 10 years, but about 8 years in, there was this one little window of time where my youngest daughter started to go to school. And there's that little chunk of time that you get back as a parent. And I wanted to do something with that time, and I wanted to be a student again. Because it had been so long. And Amy, I was like, I want to go study with Amy. And I took her course in person. And it was wonderful. I mean, for me, I did like a postmodern movement in college. So I had like a little bit of like developmental movement background. I had some experience. So if someone says to me, like you were describing, move from your organs, like,
yeah,
okay, I feel like I can kind of get a sense of what that is. But she would say something like, move from your skin. And I'd just be like I had nothing, you know what I mean? Like, I didn't know what that was, but I love that place in a way of, I have no idea what that means, or like, that's what I wanted. That's why I put myself in that position
yeah,
to be that
yeah,
fresh place as a student.
yes.
But I will say it requires someone needs to be on board for that inquiry. If
Yes,
someone came for a workout
yes,
and you're asking them to move from their joints or whatever, or in this kind of way,
yes.
and they have to make choices and you're not just telling them what to do, they're not always into it.
They don't know what. Yeah, it's a different ball game. That's for sure. That's for
Yeah.
sure. I do like that inner inquiry. I come from a Vipassana background and did Vipassana really seriously for a long time. So my yoga is very meditative in that way. It's a bit like meditation with movement, like Vipassana with movement in a way. And I one of the things that I also like to do is move people away from dominance over musculature and using muscles to create form, muscles to move, we're very muscle orientated, and trying to get behind that so that we do have a bit more choices and more flexibilities, I think, in many ways too.
I think that's right. The teacher who got me to what you're describing was Desikachar, that
Yeah,
his
I was going
teachings
to talk about
around
it. Yeah,
simpler breath-centered practice that you do
yeah,
by yourself at home,
yeah,
that helped get me out of this idea of like muscle effort to accomplish forms.
Yeah.
And I also just at some point could do a bunch of forms and still had massive pain and felt miserable.
Yes.
And it revealed itself to be a very superficial accomplishment to be able to do those poses.
Yes.
Uh,
Because you also talk about yourself being very flexible and able to do those poses quite easy.
At some point, in my early 20s, I certainly had a lot of natural flexibility. I was also quite, masochistic about making my body do stuff because
20 years
I was
old.
really, well, I was under the impression, quite frankly, that accomplishing, level 4 alignment meant closer to enlightenment.
Enlightenment.
Again, my intentions, well, I guess there was
I
also
still haven't met anyone
certainly,
who's enlightened, you know.
I know it's just, it was a silly notion, but it was a notion I had because, I had this idea, you read about the 8 limbs of yoga
Yeah.
and, asana, pranayama, meditation, and what's at the top is the samadhi. So I thought I want to get to samadhi because if I could get to the samadhi, then I don't have all this pain in me anymore. And when yoga first really hit the scene and it was so much about asana, it certainly seemed like if I could accomplish these forms, it would equal something. Maybe I don't even know what I thought it was, but it was going to mean something. And then when I was able to do them and people were like applauding me and letting me be a teacher for that, I felt like this is what we're working towards. I can do mediocre gymnastics and I have lots of pain, but I can do that handstand press and everybody thinks I'm advanced.
Yes.
And that's really where gentle is the new advanced came out of. It was like, what is it advanced? What makes yoga advanced? It can't be being able to do these poses because I'm still miserable. So it can't be that.
And I'm the opposite because I'm from a stiff stock. You know, when I was a kid, I couldn't sit cross-legged at school. You know, when I was 6 years old, I had to kneel. And, I was 15, I played a lot of sports. I couldn't touch my toes, couldn't bend forward. So, I mean, if you're looking at form, taking you on that linear approach to becoming transformed or enlightened, I'm never going to get there, am I? I can't.
But you see, even if you could do it, there was always more. There was always a variation. There was always like when alignment is being coveted, it felt to me like a carrot that gets dangled and you reach for it and the carrot gets pulled away. Like it was you never got it.
No.
And even if you got it, it didn't feel great.
No.
At least for me, it didn't.
No, it's just, it's that external thing. I think that's one of the things also that right at the beginning of the pandemic and the lockdown was like my teaching online yoga. It's like, it can't matter. It doesn't matter whether you do this form. It's like, you're overweight, you're underweight. None of these things, they can't really matter.
It's so interesting you bring that up too, in a couple of contexts, the online teaching, because for a long time I did just one-way streams. Like even before Zoom was so much of a thing, I did like one-way streams on YouTube where it was a closed circuit, but I couldn't see them, but they could see me. I knew people were there taking class, but I couldn't see them. There was no like, we're having this interactive thing. And for a while, at a certain point, that became a problem because I felt pressure to do everything, like videotape of Jay demonstrating everything, which isn't how I normally teach a class. And at a certain point, wasn't sustainable for me physically. And at one point, my body like broke down. I have pain issues that I deal with in my latter 40s here. And, I came in to teach a class and I really wasn't in the right place physically to demonstrate anything, but I felt like I had to because I had a live stream to do.
Yeah.
So I just did it. And it was just horrible. Like I performed these asanas, like it went against everything like I kind of believe in. And I broke down and I told my producer after, I don't think I can do this anymore. I'm not doing this. And he said, well, what would you do if you had to teach a class and you were in that much pain? And I said, well, I would just sit in a chair. Like I can teach from a chair. I don't have to demonstrate. And he said, well, why don't you just do that for the stream? And I said, you mean I'm just going to sit in front of the camera in a chair and just talk to the camera and someone's going to want to pay me for that? And he said, well, that's what you're really going to do. These are like, they would be regular classes. And you know what? I came in the next day and I had to teach and I was like, you know what? I'm in pain. And I said, if you want to unsubscribe, I'll totally understand. You know what? I got a slew of emails from people, from other teachers actually, thanking me for modeling self-care.
Yes. Yeah.
And you know, since then I've switched to the interactive, and that's actually way better. I have like a projector and I put them up on my wall so I can actually see people bigger.
Yeah, I
And
thought of doing
ultimately,
that too. Yeah.
yeah, and ultimately I don't have to demonstrate in the same way, and I don't. I teach class the same way I would, regardless. But it is a idea of it, once it become online, there's like a performative element. There's no way around it. There's always a performative element to teaching, I think. But
Anyway.
once you're doing
Yeah.
the video, it's even more so in certain regards.
Yeah.
But I think that I certainly have been able to have good practice with people. And I think that you have to be able to teach, and even in certain ways, I think many teachers have had to simplify what they're doing once they start teaching online. Like
Yes.
they can't even do the same stuff. And in a way, I think that's good.
Yeah. You can't do your hands-on adjustments if you do hands-on work. I'm a little bit fortunate because I call mine yoga from the inside out, so that it's not about, I don't say, can you put your arm a little bit higher and have your palm facing the floor? These things are not necessary. So for me, the way that I've been working with this is that I've been doing my own practice, but my own internal practice, and I communicate my sensory feelings and where I'm going with the yoga and the movement. So I teach it from a internal perspective point of view, but I can still do it like you, seated down. So I feel quite fortunate in that way that I'm not looking at form, makes it easy.
Yeah. I mean, I've de-emphasized it so much. It's unbelievable at this point, where I've just made a new version of this practice video. 7 years ago, I made this practice video, which is just me doing it. And
Yeah.
I did it in like 5 different lengths, you know, 7-minute, 15-minute, 30-minute, 60 and 75-minute versions.
Yes.
And, you know, after we made that video, a lot of people have used it. I still think it's potentially very useful resource,
Yeah.
but it was problematic for me because it was a very idealized demonstration of the forms. And I felt like that's not really, I don't want it to seem like it's supposed to look like that. I think I wanted to make it very beautiful, and I did, but I don't think that's what it looks like. So we recently, before the pandemic hit, we were working on it. I shot a bunch of other people doing it. And then the idea was to cut all these different people along with me doing it. But interestingly enough, there was like some, you know, acts of God that happened. And so the last day of shooting couldn't happen, and we didn't get to shoot me. So we ultimately decided that I don't even need to be in it. So it's my voice, but I'm not in it, which is better, because it's to your point that
Nice.
it's about showing these people making their choices in the practice.
Nice.
Because
Yeah.
because that's what it's about, when it's no longer about one right way to do it. As you were saying earlier, it's about people having their own proprioceptions and their own barometers to make their own choices. And it's very apparent when you see people doing that.
Yeah.
And it actually, as teachers, I think, certainly teachers who are of this kind of mind, when you see people steering their own ships and embodying themselves in that way,
Yeah.
it's a joy.
Yeah.
So that kind of self-empowerment is, I think, ultimately where yoga becomes very powerful.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's the place that I like to work. And you know, there's yoga for occasions, isn't there? It's not always the same thing. You know, you might want to go for a run, you might want to lie down and be quiet, you might want to do some more powerful vinyasa, you might want to do some gentle as the new advanced, or some bone yoga, you know.
Well, you know what I would say about that is, we've had this conversation in my teacher's class just recently about what is yoga practice, because I have an idea of my yoga in the sense that you said just now, where I'll go for a run or I'll do some squats, which is like a new thing. I never used to do that kind of stuff, but to just like do a little bit of load bearing with a weight and some squats, like I do that stuff now because it feels good for my body. And I definitely think of that as like my overall, that's my part of my yoga.
Yeah.
But when I think of my yoga practice, like my hatha practice, like I was describing earlier, that is very specific. That I'm not using asana for strength training
No.
anymore.
No.
I do other things if I want that.
Yeah.
My asana is very specifically about attention and perception and those other things I was talking about, that sense of self, you
Yeah.
know?
Yeah. Fantastic. And coming back to your breath, important.
I
Right?
think that's like the technical key that made me find my way there, you know, and continues to reinforce that.
Yes.
And I'd say to your earlier comment, I think that is also a signature of Desikachar teachings, where you were
Yes.
talking about like a moving meditation. Like
Yes.
they don't really separate it out. Some schools you would say, you know, you do your pranayama to prepare you for your seat, or your asana to prepare you for your pranayama, to prepare
Yes.
you for your
Yeah.
meditation. And I was really taught from students of Desikachar that those become one seamless thing, that the
Yeah.
asana pranayama meditation is all one thing that happens. It's
Yeah.
not like these compartmentalized out
Yeah.
steps.
Yeah. Yeah. And we're just developing skills so that we can function a bit more easy in the world, and in a world that's pretty crazy. So we're talking about Zoom stuff. So what's the situation in America, New York, with studios? Because I remember listening to you back in our summer, which would have been your winter, and you were interviewing some people saying, "Oh, you know, my studio's not doing very well. I'm struggling," and I think a lot of your ongoing conversations with people have been around, you know, how can we sustain um, these yoga centers, particularly when uh, the individual yoga centers are being pushed away from having these what's the word, these big yoga centers that happen all around.
Yeah, the scaled yoga models. Well, you know, before the pandemic hit,
Yeah.
I think that I was talking a lot on the show about how kind of like I said earlier too, like being an independent creator, like the independent yoga teacher had really gotten in a predicament because there's not a sustainable way to like make a life of it and as a
Absolutely.
profession. Like I came in at an early time and people who are coming in after me weren't able to do what I did anymore because, you know, when I got a center with a very cheap rent, I didn't have to make a lot of money in order to sustain that center. But as yoga became bigger business and cities became gentrified all over the world, this is happening, the overhead just goes up. It goes up. The growth model of our world right now, this never ending growth, in order to be considered successful, yoga places, depending on where you get in, you can, like, I kept pace with the growing overhead for maybe 7 to 10 years,
Mhm.
and then it became a struggle for that last 3.
Yeah.
And part of it, the only people who could compete really in those markets were these big chain yoga centers
Yeah.
that came about.
Yeah.
They were scaled, they were venture capitalist backed corporate structures
Yeah.
where they can have many different yoga centers across all. They were just gobbling up independent centers and buying them.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then they were acquiring all these centers, and then they would have one in Brooklyn, and it didn't even matter if they lost money at that place because they had ones all over the country. You know what I mean? It's that scale model.
Yes. Yes.
So you had that happening. Then you had also like the Groupon and ClassPass. I don't know if you guys have that in New Zealand, but you had all these like yoga and marketing things happening where people moved to like a membership model,
Yes.
and the cost of classes like went down. Like teachers make less money now than they did 20 years ago in a way,
Yes.
because there was this, I don't know, almost devaluation of
Yes.
yoga instruction because it all became standardized and it's 200-hour trainings. So
Yeah.
if I offer a 200-hour yoga teacher training, I can charge you $3,000. But if I teach you the same material over an intensive weekend and I don't call it TT, it's $300. So there is a whole shift that happened in the industry.
Yeah.
And at a certain point, that's what I said earlier, like I saw like I have to be able to like own my own thing. I have to, and right now yoga teachers are having to do that because the pandemic changed
Yes.
everything.
Yes.
So there was a bunch, back to your question, there was a bunch of centers who I think were really having a hard time because they were trying to compete with these big spa-like environment centers that have these big budgets.
Yeah.
And they couldn't.
No.
And then they were, exploiting teachers and paying their teachers crap. And just ultimately the yoga was getting dumber and dumber. And so I think I was someone who was really advocating for yoga teachers to kind of make a bit of a return. I was always saying, it started at the church basements and people's living rooms.
Yes.
And then, maybe it's time for us to go back to that which is kind of what I've done.
And it's happened.
And well, the pandemic hit and that's it. There's no more in-person classes.
No.
I mean, it's just starting up again, but it shut everything down. And ultimately it had to go back to people's living rooms, quite literally.
Yeah. Yeah.
And in a way, there is something kind of, I've had a lot of conversations with yoga teachers who have had to ask themselves serious questions. Why am I doing Zoom classes for the center when I could easily be doing Zoom classes on my own?
There we go. Yeah.
But if the center had a real community that they feel a part of and they want to support that, then it makes perfect sense. But if the center was not so much feeling like that,
yes.
I
So
don't know.
Are there centers, small centers and big centers closing down? Are you getting these chains? Do you know what's happening in the world of studios?
It depends. I think that there are, yes, is the answer to your initial question. There are a lot of centers closing down who were maybe not in such a good situation already to begin with.
Yeah.
When the pandemic hit, and maybe they kept it alive a little bit with online classes, but right now everything is still sketchy with reopening. So people aren't even really feeling comfortable to reopen yet. And there's only so many months you can maintain it. I had a woman from Bend and Bloom on the show some while back, and I brought her on as a model of like how to run a yoga center on it and do it right. And she just sent the email out 2 days ago that they're not reopening in that
Wow.
space. She
Yeah.
plans to come back again, but that particular space they were in is no longer tenable.
Yeah.
So I
think
that.
Yeah. Go on. Sorry. Go on.
I was just going to say, I do think that there's a lot of centers that are closing down.
Yeah.
I also just saw like there's other opportunities opening up because people got cheap spaces. So, it'll be interesting to see. I know even like new yoga, I'm sorry, my mind's blanking, but
Yes.
core power yoga
Yes.
and Yoga Zone, not Yoga Zone, Yoga Works. Gosh, why can't I think of it? Yoga Works, which is like the biggest chain. They closed all of their New York centers down. They've closed a bunch of centers down. So even those big chains have had to like do these big slashes.
This is closing down because of the pandemic. Are they? Is that closing down? That's done, or they've just closed doors and they're going to? Because they must. The big ones, the big chains, they must have huge overheads. And how do you deal with that? They must be in trouble, huh?
They
get a lot of rain at the moment, so hopefully we can stay.
Okay, well, I would say they do so coldly, you see, because it's a corporate structure, as you were saying earlier, even, and so they just look at the numbers and like, okay, slash, not a lot of consideration about people who've put in years of their lives and energy to a place.
Yes.
So, I think again, it's certainly a real weeding out that's happening because I think a lot of people, it doesn't even make sense to keep at it if it's going to be too hard, so a lot of people are choosing to find other things.
Yeah.
I do think that there are some folks who are really, like we were talking about earlier, yoga practice is still the thing that's making it all work for them.
Yes.
And those people are being very resourceful and adaptive and doing Zoom classes and carrying on.
Yeah. Well, I had never done a Zoom class pre-lockdown. I'd never done these chats as well. And it was just something my brother said to me. He said, you should do some podcasts. And I went, should I? Well, okay. I know a lot of people. I'm going to call on them. We're going to have some chats. Jay Brown
It's
does a
great.
good job. I'm
It's
going to copy
great
him.
though. Isn't it fun though? I mean, I love it.
That's awesome.
It's such a great way to like
I mean,
learn
you're in
and
my office.
share.
Oh, cool. Yeah.
I know. It's unbelievable, you know.
Yeah.
So yeah, I know what you mean.
So, and they've been saying, during the we coming out of the pandemic, it's a time to reset ourselves, time to reset the world. I don't know whether it's going to reset and come out in a way that I would like. I've got no idea.
Mm.
But the opportunities are there for this kind of relationship, and presumably the same with you. You're having people that you've connected with around the world that are coming into your Zoom classes that you would have had to travel to.
You know, earlier today, I had a class in here and I had someone from Switzerland, someone from Spain, someone from Australia,
Yeah, me too. It's
someone
great.
from Brooklyn. It was
Nice.
amazing. It was so cool, you
So
know?
cool.
And
Yeah.
I, again, I was resistant to the technology initially, but at a certain point, I do think it can be utilized. And, you know, I'm certainly having good yoga practice with people,
Yeah.
even via this technologies.
Yeah.
I also mentioned I had someone in class yesterday, and that feels different.
Yeah.
And I still want that.
Yeah.
But I do think that there's, you know, one of the beautiful things about the podcast is it has, you know, connected me to like people all over the place.
Yeah.
And that's a pretty fantastic thing. You know, I'm so grateful for it.
Yeah. So where's all of this going to go? What happens if we go into a big lockdown again?
Oh man, I don't know.
I know
I
you.
don't know. I have no idea what we're gonna do. I mean, here's what I would say. I
Yes.
have moments where I feel very skeptical,
Yeah.
as you were expressing. I don't always trust the official narrative. So I'm looking at, like, you know, as morbid as it sounds, you know, daily death rates. You know, are there more people dying or not more people dying? I know it seems so strange, but I am. Um, I also mentioned that right now we're having to make all these choices about who I'm letting my daughters play with, and
Yes.
do I
Yeah.
think it's okay? Like, I had to have this whole negotiation with my wife. It was okay to let this person come to class
Yes.
yesterday. Like,
Yeah.
we didn't just say okay. Like, I had to talk to my wife about it. I didn't want to assume, you know, she was being invited into my pod.
Yes.
And so, you know, I think in terms of where things are going, one thing that I have found to be like a saving grace for me, which I would just share with you and anybody who's listening to this, especially a yoga teacher who's trying to navigate this new, almost apocalyptic landscape. Um, I, for a long time, have embraced this idea, which I did not invent. It's called 1,000 True Fans. And I don't know if you're familiar with that, but I always enjoy sharing it with people because it's a bit of like a thing that's so helped me. And idea is that if you're somebody who's like a creative, independent artist type, and you're trying to have that be a way for you to make a life of it, you need 1,000 true fans. And the number's malleable, but the idea is if there's 1,000 people on the planet who really like appreciate what you do and believe in it and would like buy the thing that you make, and then you put out, let's say, $100 worth of stuff a year, you just made a living off of that 1,000 people.
Mm.
And that could change, you know, the numbers could be less people and more money or whatever. Those numbers are malleable, but the idea is that like right now I'm making I was before the pandemic and still was making like a better living off of 4,000 emails on an email list than other people I know who had 1 million Instagram followers.
Wow. Yes.
So the idea is that it's about depth
Yeah.
versus reach.
Yeah.
It's like people who connecting to you on a deeper level,
Yeah.
on a way that's more, you know, over time, which I think is in line with yoga as well.
Yes.
And that is actually more sustainable, even from kind of like a business standpoint.
Yeah.
Um, so I think that there is a bit of a return in some ways, a bit of a renaissance, if you will, of teacher-student relationship and, you know, smaller circles of people coming together to practice rather than people making brands and trying to like grow these big empires.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Small is possibly a way to go. That's for sure. Rather than, I mean, we're doing it. We're doing it in our own home. We're looking at how we can be creative. You know, you're an artist, communicator, entrepreneurial person. You have your people doing your tech stuff, supporting that, so that you can
I
go
mean,
out and be
I mean,
creative.
I do a lot of that myself, but I know what you mean. I think I wear a bunch of hats, and I'm kind of techie myself. So I do a lot of back end stuff and
Yeah,
save myself a lot of money
yeah,
because I don't hire people to do it.
yeah,
Me and my producer Josh are sort of like two guys with laptops doing the jobs of like 10 people, which, you know, at some point, frankly, I would love to outsource some of that,
yeah,
but you kind of have to, be lean and mean, as they say.
yeah. Yes, absolutely. Yeah. And um, how are you coping with it all? How have you had a roller coaster of emotions in terms of lockdown
Yes.
weeks and weeks?
I mean,
There's a
I
lot
have
of
good,
grief that happened in the
yeah,
early days, and I know that you've communicated a lot about that in terms of when your mother passed when you were around about 16. I remember
yes.
you talking about that when you also came to Auckland at the start of your class as well.
Hmm.
So yeah, how's it been for you?
I mean, I'm overall doing okay. And I think early on, there was certainly some real freak out moments. I mean, because there was real panic being so close to New York when things were really flaring and all the news of like the ICUs being overwhelmed. I mean, it was very scary. So, you
Yeah,
know, going to the supermarket and there not being anything on the shelves, and like it was really a mind blowing experience, never before in my life. So there was a lot of anxiety. I do have a very, I think, healthy, strong relationship with my wife, which has been invaluable. Like somebody I talk to and that I love and loves me back and supports me, and that kind of mutual partnership that we've developed has been a saving grace as well.
yeah,
I think, you know, as I said before, I feel very grateful for having had a life of yoga practice for as long as I have, because I do feel like I have these things that I'm relying upon that are helping me maintain a level of mental health
yeah,
that I observe others around me not always able to maintain under this much strain.
yeah,
So even with my moments of freak out,
yeah.
I'm able to bring it back together again. And I know other folks who don't have that and, you know, need more help, need
Yes,
more support.
yeah,
Um,
yeah. Which is one
I
of the
think,
reasons again for reaching out, because um, you know, I resonate with that also. It doesn't mean that it's easy. It doesn't mean that I don't go a bit dark or a bit agitated or wondering what's going on and confused. But you do have those tools that you can keep coming back to support you in just being, I don't
the
know, it comes back
ritual,
to being kind to yourself for me. It's such
isn't
a,
it? I say at the end of every show, right? I ask for it because I agree with you. It is that consistent ritual
yeah,
that is specifically about that, about a kindness with myself.
yeah,
Like that is an important experience that I need to be having regularly,
yes,
given all of the other experiences I have that are not that.
yeah, yeah, yeah. And sometimes it is a choice where you can go, okay, I'm just going to be nice to myself, but why? And I think sometimes also beating yourself up for a while is a process towards going, hey, what are you doing? Why, you know, why am I struggling?
Yep.
And you've had lots of this in terms of your podcasts, because you've um, around the Mark Whitwell stuff, which was it was fascinating watching you then. Sorry, I'm not laughing at you.
No, it's okay. I mean,
I apologize. I didn't mean that.
uh,
It was
no, that's
it was
fine.
it was like a yoga soap, and I'm going, shit. How's Jay going to come out of this one? You kind of jumped in and you went,
I mean, 2020 started out for me with that in January,
yeah,
and then the pandemic hit. So, you know, I was just recovering from that. And, you know, it's very difficult because, and I want to be careful because I want to be careful about what I say, only because I still have I still have great deal of support for Christy Rowe, the woman who came out against Mark Whitwell.
Yes.
And it's hard to explain why she, I don't know, wrote about me in the way that she did. It was difficult for me to understand that because my memory of it was very different. And if you wrote what I wrote about my retelling of that situation, um, I really also came up against what people are talking about a lot right now in terms of like people calling for me to be canceled. Like I wanted to be like a ally, as they say. I had spoken to her and asked her if she wanted to come on the show. Like I was very much ready to support her in coming out with her story, but I ended up being sort of branded as an enabler of him and wasn't allowed to do that. And you know, I can understand that if she didn't want me to be a part of it. I understand that viewpoint as well. But at some point, initially, I just wanted to support her, even though people were saying all these things about me that were patently untrue. I wanted to support her, but there was such a backlash. And
Yes.
people were asserting so many things about me that were not true. At
Yeah.
some point,
Yeah.
I couldn't help it, and I had to defend myself. But it
Yeah.
was almost like if I defend myself, then I'm siding with him, which is not what I wanted to do.
Yes.
So in any case, I did ultimately defend myself. People very angry, but it was a real lesson for me because there was an obvious thing that was happening, which people just now, there was this letter in Harper's Magazine that Chomsky and the author of Harry Potter signed about how there's been kind of like almost an illiberalism on the left where it's almost becomes like this canceling of people out with there's like not allowing for growth. And I've had plenty of people on the show even talk about that as well, like calling in rather than calling out. And I I certainly had been having those conversations and then I became the subject
Yeah.
of it.
Yeah.
And it was really an example. You were asking me earlier about transparency.
Yeah.
You know, I was entirely transparent about the process I went through. Some people thought I shouldn't do that,
Yes.
that it was reckless of me to do that, but it was the only thing I knew how to do.
Yeah.
And ultimately, you know, I'm feel okay about everything that I said and did. And it's still something I think would maybe want to be talked about again.
Yes. Yeah.
But also things have changed so much, so drastically, you know? I mean, it's just to say it, it's a strange phenomenon in my country where, you know, there was a huge movement against Brett Kavanaugh. I don't know if you guys know the Supreme Court nominee who had a Me Too story attached to him.
Uh-huh.
But there was a huge uproar over that. And then now, like the Democratic nominee, Joe Biden, he's got plenty of Me Too stories too. So the Me Too movement, it's had the pandemic and the change in politics is really, I don't know, sometimes it reveals some aspects of it that didn't have as much integrity as other aspects.
Yeah. It was damned if I do and damned if I don't situation that you got yourself into in many ways. And I think it's a shame in the world that that happens, that we can't, because it's okay to fuck up because we do. And then you go, you know, if I'd had my time again, I'd like to have done it a bit different. And I think that's the whole sense of, for me, it's where you're coming from. It's your volition behind it. So if you say something and there's half a dozen people listening to it, we're all going to pick it up very differently. And some will say, you know, I felt a bit attacked by Jay. And some say, well, I thought he was being really supportive. And it's okay to have all those different things. And we don't have to dislike anyone because of that. The world is, and I think during the pandemic time, it's got even more edgy in that way. I've done stuff on, and I've stopped doing posts on my Facebook when I'm anti something. And I've had some of my good friends going, I'm talking about vaccinations because I'm anti-vax. I'm much more into looking at how we can have a good immune system. I like hearing Charles Eisenstein talking about Artemisia annua because that's apparently fantastic. I can't remember where I was going. Where was I going with that, Jay?
You were talking about vaccinations.
Yeah, well,
I,
it's a big story, isn't it? I was, talking about how tolerant and not tolerant we are, and how it's where you're coming from that's important. And my feeling is, and listening to you around that time, that you were coming from a really cool place, that you did your best, and I don't think
see,
you can do any more than that, whether it's perfect or not perfect.
here's what I would say. I certainly know more now about the way that women get treated
Yes,
by men who abuse power than
yes,
I did then. But
yes,
even back then, when I wasn't as educated about it as I am now, I still, like, as you're saying, I know when I went home and like was in tears with my wife over what to do about this situation. You know what I mean? It wasn't like I was in the way I was being depicted wasn't what was happening. You know what I mean? And I know that in my heart and soul.
yeah,
So again, I think it was, like you say, a damned if you do, damned if you don't kind of situation. I do really feel very strongly about teachers taking responsibility for the role that they play.
yeah,
And I think it is the teacher's responsibility to set these necessary boundaries in order for there to be healthy relationships and learning.
yeah,
So I feel very strongly about that. And I think I don't know that I would do things differently. I did, as you said, everything I knew to do.
yes,
And ultimately, I think that I like to think that sharing all of that drama as I did,
yeah,
at the very least, got people thinking
yeah,
about important things.
yeah.
And I think that is a net positive.
Yeah, and also the whole Black Lives Matter, with the talk that you gave with the um, what was the guy's name?
Dylan, just this week, yeah,
Yeah, that was awesome. He's such a cool man, eh?
he is.
That was such a lovely man. And that whole thing about you know doing things that are PC or not PC, and what is PC now and what wasn't PC before. It's a minefield about, like, you can't say this, you can't say that. I come from an English background, and a lot of the humor, the old English humor, if you even see it on some of the old YouTube clips, you can't do that stuff now. And it's like, and it's changing quickly.
Well, I have had a fascination with comedy, with comedians in the last several years, because their process of like expression and connecting through laughter,
Yeah.
I don't know, I've related to that. And they were really, even some years ago, like saying I can't go to college campuses anymore. There was a real
Mm,
clear something happening um, where I do think, and I certainly got caught up in it some myself. I wrote recently about this, where I was really at a certain point feeling like I was making choices so that I wouldn't get in trouble with like what felt like woke police. And that really was unhealthy. It was an unhealthy place to operate from.
yeah.
Um, so I don't know. I think now I feel much more secure
Oh,
to assert it. And I think, those conversations still should be had in terms of
yeah.
um, teachers abusing their power and women being treated with the respect that any human being would deserve.
Yeah.
In terms of Black Lives Matter, I actually have another episode coming this week about someone talking about Black Lives Matter in the context of core power yoga. I was talking about these big corporate structures,
Mm,
and people like calling out executives. And even a recent story that was really sort of a demonstration of how problematic the situation is there was a center owner in Colorado. He actually had 6 different locations. It was a big center, but it was independently owned. And I'd met that guy, and he was an interesting guy, let's just say that. And they did a lot of really great things at those centers, including like LGBT stuff workshops and anti-racism workshops. They were very like part of this effort to be part of this inclusion conversation. And when the pandemic first hit, this owner actually obtained a PPP loan, which was one of the assistance programs, which enabled him to pay the teachers, even though they weren't teaching, for 3 months.
Wow.
So he actually, like, that's huge. So many yoga sitters didn't do that. He actually was like paying his teachers to try to like support everybody because he got this big loan. But basically, when the Black Lives Matter explosion happened, and as I was discussing with Dylan, I do think some of that was just like boiling over because everybody had been so cooped up for so long.
Absolutely.
And then that video came out, which is a horrible, horrible video. And so in the swell of that Black Lives upsurge, you know, someone who taught at these centers, or one of those 6 centers, called out the ownership over not being inclusive enough, I guess. Or there was actually like a tweet, someone in their like public relations, like they had like a PR person who did their tweeting for them, and someone made a dumb tweet without realizing what they did, and someone seized on that and like did like a hashtag campaign to get people to like cancel their memberships.
Wow.
And like a whole bunch of people did, like 400 people, and then he's had to close all 6 of them.
Well,
and there was an article by one of the other teachers, a Black teacher who didn't have that same experience, and was sort of like, oh, really? That's what we're doing? Was that the best thing? Did that really help the Black Lives movement to close all those yoga centers down? I don't know.
No.
So on the one hand, I actually do support the movement. I think that we've militarized our police. I think that we've funded our police in disproportionate ways from the suburbs to the cities. So I'm in favor of that movement, but there's sort of like this expression of it even in the yoga world where we're like kind of calling out to like close people down when everybody's closed down from the pandemic already. It seemed counterproductive to both the movement and like the yoga world, you know?
Yeah. It's really, I think that's quite sad really, that someone gets a lot of pressure like that and there's not the conversations around it to, it's the damned if you do, damned if you don't again, you know, you've got to be out there. That's quite sad. And I don't really know the situation fully, so I can't really talk about it with any authority, but just on the face of it, and it is hard because everybody, as I said before, we all see the world very differently. You know, I come from a Jewish background of my grandfather in concentration camps, and that's another story, another day maybe. And so people do know what it's like to be persecuted on so many different levels. I'm not going to go down that conversation today. I might get in trouble.
I hear you. I think, I mean, again, I've had,
because
I
care a lot. That's the thing. I care a lot. I'd like to go out in the world and make the world a better place, like this afternoon, and I can't do it, you know. But the thing that I can do is I can do my own practice. I can look after myself, and I can share some tools for people so that they can also then go, okay, I'm feeling stressed. If I do this movement with some breath, or I do some breath movement and I focus my mind, then I can have maybe some more clarity, and I can control the way that I'm going down the rapids rather than feeling I'm free flowing in some kayak that I can't do anything with. So,
and I would add to that I think that is also useful when we try to have conversations like this where we risk talking about difficult things, because I think that also, it models what I think we need. It's the counterpose to the knee-jerk social media takedown thing.
Yeah.
Like risking having a conversation and even saying something wrong and then having to think about that is a example that I think is a good example to set.
This is one of the things that I totally agree. So this is one of the things that I try to work towards, and I say try to because it's an ongoing thing for me, and I'm not always good at it, and I do the opposite sometimes too. But ultimately, if someone's throwing something at me and I throw it back, then we've got two things in that. So if you throw something at me and then I can relate to you in a way that doesn't throw it back, then we start to have a conversation that can go somewhere rather than us coming just loggerheads and battling. So how can I function in the world so that I can be that person that kind of reflects it, but doesn't push it back with either the same energy or the opposite side of the coin, which just exacerbates it.
Oh, that is so well put. And I would say that's true for me, whether it's talking to someone of different political viewpoints or my 10-year-old daughter. It's the same.
So one of the things that I do ask when people come for our little chats, have you got a 5 or 10 minute little meditation breath work that you'd like to offer people, that you could say, hey, look, a little J thing? You don't.
I could try. I've never done that before in like a show like this, so that's novel, and I'm certainly willing to try. See if I could give us a little moment of what would you call it? What would be the purpose of this little ritual we're going to have?
It's you sharing your yoga wisdom of breath and mind work. Hey,
all right.
Hey, look at it. We've got these toolboxes, haven't we? And you don't take out all your tools all at the same time. And so there might be in the toolbox, there'd be this little J thing that someone heard, and they said, okay.
All right. Well, here's where I'll go. I think I got what you're going for.
What I'd like you to do is talk me through it, and so I can have that experience, and then on these, and then other people can. I'll time it so people know that at so many minutes through the talk, Jay does this awesome thing. It's got to be awesome now.
Oh, see, you're setting me up. I don't know. I mean, I would say again. All right, well, let's try. Okay. So we'll take this moment, and the first thing I think we would need to try to do is see if, and it will be very difficult, but if we can, we would try to take this moment to see if we could set aside like everything that we were just talking about and everything that's happened in this day up until now. And I guess if you're driving and listening to this, I don't know what people are doing while they're listening to this, but the idea is that you would be able to take a moment to set aside everything else and sort of allow for your attention to find itself right here with your immediate surroundings. Maybe the sound of this room that you're in, or the sound of my voice even. And then to see if sitting here in this moment, we could just either observe your breath, like giving your attention something to go to. It doesn't have to be your breath. It could be a sound or something else. Anything that's tactile, like in the room right now, to put your attention to would be fine. But to be with something right here in this room. And maybe in this moment, here in this room, we could feel that we would be allowed for a brief few moments to relinquish our effort. Like relinquish, ultimately, like relinquishing like the immediate effort of having to do anything or say anything in this moment, but maybe a deeper relinquishing of effort in you that has to do with your broader effort of identity and survival. So you have a few moments where you're not a woman or a man or a girlfriend or a boyfriend or a mother, a father, a sister, a brother. You're not your job or your name. You're just existing. Breath happening, heart beating. And in that, just existing, perhaps you would observe, or at least just entertain it as a notion, that there is an inherent wonder to that. It is a profound miracle beyond full comprehension that you were once a conglomeration of cells that manifested into a thinking, feeling being sitting here now. And that miracle and wonder of your own existence is, I think, for myself, a place of healing and perspective from which to make good choices and be the best expression of ourselves that we can. Om Bur Bruvaswakang Tat Sabitur Varenyam Bargo Devasya Dyamahi Yo Yonhang Prachohurdayan Om Bur Bruvaswakang Tat Sabitur Varenyam Bargo Devasya Dyamahi Yo Yonhang Prachohurdayan Om Bur Bruvaswakang Tat Savitur Varenyam Bhargo Devasya Dyamahi Yo Yonhang Prachohurdayan Om Shanti Shanti Shantihi Om. Okay.
Thank you.
You're welcome. You know, Paul, I have to say there was a very interesting moment for me there. The choice to chant was surprising to me.
Yeah.
And risky. Risky, even given the conversation we were having. But you know why? I felt that the words weren't doing justice.
Yes.
And so the only thing I had in my back pocket was the sounds. So that's why that choice was made. Hope it was okay.
Okay. It reminds me of something that I've used, a little phrase, enough is the new abundance. So in that one moment, I if someone gave me something, it was too much. I didn't need anything more in that moment. And I know that people that have been through concentration camps, I remember a story of a Buddhist, Tibetan nun fleeing from the Chinese and had to flee over through the mountains and through ice barefoot. And when she gave her interview, she said that they did abuse me and they did all these things, but what they didn't get is they didn't get my spirit. And so she kept aside that part that was her spirit. And it kind of reminds me that, you know, we've and I know it's easy to say of me being comfortable, but it is true. In many, many moments, we do have enough. And if you have any more, then it's too much abundance. So that was beautiful. Thank you.
Oh, you're welcome.
It's
I've
been
enjoyed
so
this
cool
conversation.
I'd like to do it again because I've got this whole, like with everyone, I've got these lists and lists of things. So
I understand. I'd be happy to. You know, I'll say this to you. I just looked up at the clock and I was like, oh my gosh. So whenever the time goes that quickly, that's usually a good sign.
Wow, that's crazy. It's been really awesome. So I'm going to thank you. I'll turn the recording off and we'll just have a little chat afterwards. I'll find out about the real you. No, I'm only kidding. I know. And so, hey, Jay, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Pleasure.